Whispers across the time. Chapter 1. Andrea Baxter's husband, Alexander Wilkinson, had been dead for 3 years. In the first year after his death, she sold her art studio and worked herself to exhaustion just to pay off his debts. In the second, she barely slept, taking on endless overtime to cover his sister's tuition, until her body finally gave up on her. By the third year, she was drinking herself sick to raise money for his mother's surgery. Her stomach bled that night, but she didn't stop. She threw up blood in the bathroom, wiped her mouth, and forced a smile. Because the Blue Wave Group's CEO was waiting, and this deal was her only chance to survive. When the door opened, she managed a weak smile and lifted her glass in a formal toast. Yet, the man sitting at the head of the table was a man she had buried 3 years ago. Her husband. The metallic taste of blood she had forced down rose in her throat again. His handsome, aloof face and those deep, indifferent eyes. Every detail had drawn her into countless sweet dreams, only for her to wake from them in tears just as many times. Alexander, Andrea's voice trailed off. She stared blankly at the man before her in shock. How could he be here? He had been gone for 3 years. Alexander's eyes flickered, but his voice was flat. You've mistaken me for someone else. Andrea's fingers trembled uncontrollably around the wine glass. They had been together for 3 years and married for another 3. She could never confuse him with anyone else. Andrea stared hard at Alexander, her heart pounding violently as a torrent of questions and grievances surged through her. She wanted to ask why he wasn't dead and why he had never come home. Did he have any idea how much she had suffered these past 3 years? But before she could speak, the door swung open and a pregnant woman stepped inside. Honey, what's taking so long? Didn't you say you'd just take a quick look? Andrea froze. Her blood ran cold. Every word she wanted to say caught in her throat. The woman clung to Alexander's arm, eyeing Andrea curiously. Who's this? Do you know her? Alexander's cold gaze settled on Andrea. Nope, just some random person. His words hit Andrea like a sudden storm, leaving her chest tight with pain. She remained frozen in place, watching him wrap an arm around the pregnant woman and walk out, never once looking back. By the time Andrea returned home, it was already 11:00 p.m. A vicious pain tore through her stomach. Ghostly pale, she fumbled for her pills with trembling hands and forced them down dry. The noise woke her mother-in-law, Rebecca Wilkinson. She stepped out of her bedroom and gave Andrea a cold, dismissive glance. Why are you home so late? Britty has exams soon. Don't disturb her. Andrea's lashes quivered, her mind consumed by the sight of Alexander standing there, alive. Was it really him, or just someone who looked like him? She drew a sharp breath, forcing herself to stay calm. Rebecca, I think I saw Alex today. The water glass slipped slightly in Rebecca's hand, her face paling in an instant. Nonsense. Alex has been dead for 3 years, she snapped. You're having drunken delusions. Next time, don't come home until you've sobered up. With that, she hurried back to her room and slammed the door shut behind her. Andrea stared at the closed door, pressing her lips tight. She had briefly wondered if she was simply drunk and seeing things, but the sharp pain stabbing her stomach told her otherwise. Her mind was clear. What she saw was real. The next morning, as soon as she got to work, her rival, Haley Ramirez, greeted her with biting sarcasm. Stomach bleeding yesterday, back at work today. You're a real grind machine, aren't you? You've already driven away several of my team members. Why don't you just burn out everyone and do all the work yourself? Pale, lipped, Andrea sat at her desk, ignoring Haley. That $50 perfect attendance bonus went straight to Rebecca's medical bills. She couldn't afford to lose it. Mockery or stomach pain, she would endure it all. But Haley wasn't satisfied. Her smirk hardened. Of course, you would do anything for money. Last night you tried cozying up to Mr. Wilkinson, didn't you? Too bad he's been married for 5 years now. Andrea froze, snapping her head up. What did you say? Alexander had been gone for 3 years. 5 years ago, they had just celebrated their first anniversary. Haley gave a sharp laugh. Next time you try throwing yourself at someone, at least do your homework. He's got a second kid on the way. With that, she hurried back to her room and slammed the door shut behind her. Andrea stared at the closed door, pressing her lips tight. She had briefly wondered if she was simply drunk and seeing things, but the sharp pain stabbing her stomach told her otherwise. Her mind was clear. What she saw was real. The next morning, as soon as she got to work, her rival, Haley Ramirez, greeted her with biting sarcasm. Stomach bleeding yesterday, back at work today. You're a real grind machine, aren't you? You've already driven away several of my team members. Why don't you just burn out everyone and do all the work yourself? Pale, lipped, Andrea sat at her desk, ignoring Haley. That $50 perfect attendance bonus went straight to Rebecca's medical bills. She couldn't afford to lose it. Mockery or stomach pain, she would endure it all. But Haley wasn't satisfied. Her smirk hardened. Of course, you would do anything for money. Last night you tried cozying up to Mr. Wilkinson, didn't you? Too bad he's been married for 5 years now. Andrea froze, snapping her head up. What did you say? Alexander had been gone for 3 years. 5 years ago, they had just celebrated their first anniversary. Haley gave a sharp laugh. Next time you try throwing yourself at someone, at least do your homework. He's got a second kid on the way. Andrea's face drained of color. Her hands clenched at her sides. A crushing heartbreak threatened to drown her completely. She moved through her work like an empty shell, and by the time she got home, it was late into the night. Her sister-in-law, Bridget Wilkinson, said with a smile, "Drea, the school art tour next semester costs $700. We need to pay soon." Andrea looked at her, her chest convulsing with a violent storm of emotions. Bridget had no clue that Alexander was alive, married to someone else, and done with Andrea and this family. Andrea turned her head away, swallowing the ache in her throat. "All right, I'll transfer it to your advisor." "You're the best. Love you, I'm off to paint now," Bridget chirped, then skipped off to her room with a grin. Exhausted, Andrea collapsed onto the couch and saw Bridget's phone. She was about to call out when a WhatsApp notification lit the screen. She glanced down and froze. The monthly allowance has already been transferred. The person who sent the message was Alexander. Chapter 2. Andrea's mind went completely blank. She stared at the message in disbelief. A second later, Bridget's phone buzzed again with a bank notification. "Your account received a deposit of $15,000 on October 25, 2024 at 11:43. Current balance is $72,472. She counted the zeros again and again, until her vision blurred. Since Alexander's death, she had carried the entire weight of his family on her shoulders. Rebecca's illness, Bridget's tuition and living expenses for art school, the company's debts, and the mortgage each one was pressing down until she could barely breathe. She sold her studio, sold her dreams, and threw herself into a cutthroat sales job that cared only for profit, not lives. She worked harder than anyone so that his family could live better. But in this moment, every sacrifice felt like a cruel joke. The cruelest irony was that after working herself to the bone day and night, she had only just finished repaying the money she borrowed for Rebecca's last hospital stay that very afternoon. $500 was just 1 month's interest on the $70,000 in savings. She had worked 2 full months of overtime just to cover it. Andrea's chest clenched, the bitter taste of blood rising in her mouth. Just then, Bridget hurried out to grab her phone. "Drea, get some rest. You've got work tomorrow." Andrea tightened her grip, swallowing her tears, and forced out a hoarse whisper. "The hospital just sent the bill from Rebecca's last stay. It's $500. I already paid your tuition. I don't have any left." Bridget replied without hesitation, as if it were only natural. "Just wait until your next paycheck. You'll figure something out, right?" Andrea shut her eyes. Something deep inside her shattered completely. Her heart felt carved to pieces. The pain so sharp she could barely breathe. The next day, for the first time, she didn't stay for overtime. When she walked out of the office, the sky still held the faintest trace of light. She stood there, dazed, staring up as if it were something foreign. On her way home, she passed a jewelry store and drifted inside. In the display window, a camellia necklace shimmered softly under the lights. She remembered stopping at this same store just after graduation. Back then, Alexander had just begun his career. His eyes were full of love and determination as he said, "Someday, whatever you want, I'll buy it for you." But 5 years had passed. He was gone, and she had never again allowed herself to buy anything so frivolous. "Would you like it on?" the clerk asked gently. Andrea snapped, out of her daze, flustered, and shook her head. She was about to refuse when a voice behind her cut in. "A sales manager who can't even afford a necklace. How pathetic." Andrea stiffened. Turning, she saw a pregnant woman standing there. It was Alexander's girlfriend, Dorothy Preston. Dorothy pulled out a gold card and handed it to the clerk. "Wrap this up for her. Charge it to my husband's card." The name printed on the card stabbed into Andrea's chest like a knife. The clerk boxed the necklace and handed it over. Dorothy passed it to her with a look of disdain. "If you want something, earn it yourself. Don't crawl into men's beds. Women like you are all the same, clawing their way into a man's sheets just for a scrap of benefit." Andrea's face drained of color. Her voice was low, trembling, but sharp. "Just because that's who you are, you think everyone else is the same." Dorothy let out a cold laugh, her lips curling with mockery. "The difference is I don't have to beg. Whatever I want, he gives me." Andrea's chest tightened, and Alexander's words surfaced in her mind. Her heart no longer even felt like her own. It hurt too much. "Someday, whatever you want, I'll buy it for you." The promise had come true, but the woman wasn't her. Dorothy turned and left. Andrea clutched the necklace, her knuckles white, and bit down hard as she hailed a cab to follow. The neon of the city faded into silence as the car pulled into a gated villa community. She stood outside the fence, watching Dorothy walk into the house. Through the wide glass windows, she saw warm light glowing. Alexander sat with his head pressed to Dorothy's belly. She whispered something, and he smiled before leaning down to kiss her with tender joy. Rain poured down, drenching Andrea where she stood, staring unblinking at the scene inside. She could no longer tell if the water running down her face was rain or tears. Inside the villa, Alexander turned his head toward the floor, to ceiling window as if sensing something. Their eyes met across the rain, streaked glass, but the distance between them already felt like another lifetime. Chapter 3. Rain drummed against the umbrella, sharp and relentless. Alexander held one out to her, rain soaking the cuff of his expensive suit. "What are you doing here?" Andrea's lips were pale, her eyes hollow and lifeless. She didn't take the umbrella. Instead, she opened her palm. The camellia necklace lay quietly in her hand. She bit down hard on her lip, her voice tangled with the sobs caught in her throat. "I came to return this. Your new girlfriend bought it for me." Then she let out a broken laugh, though her eyes burned red and wet. "Your promise came true after all, Alexander, but why? Was I not enough? How could you walk away so coldly and choose someone else?" Alexander's gaze flickered. His grip on the umbrella tightened. "You did nothing wrong." "Why then?" He was silent for a long time. Finally, he lifted his eyes. "Because I was tired. 3 years of marriage with you drained me to the core." The color drained from Andrea's face. Her heart plummeted into an icy abyss. Her world crumbled with those words. Tears flooded her vision, until everything turned to white haze. She couldn't force out another word. "So please don't ever disturb my life again." His voice, under the umbrella, was colder than the storm itself. "We're over." The pitch black night was so still it felt suffocating. Behind him, Dorothy's voice drifted out. "Honey, who's that?" Spots flickered chaotically across Andrea's vision, her body feeling as if it were splitting apart, the pain so sharp it stole her breath. She stumbled back a step. then turned and fled into the rain, clutching the necklace so tightly that the camellia necklace cut deep into her palm. By the time she returned home, it was already 10:30 p.m. Her hand had just touched the doorknob when she heard Bridget's voice drifting out from inside. "She's like a puppet on strings," Bridget sneered. Andrea froze. Then came Rebecca's voice. "It's all because of that fake death stunt of yours. Alex got away clean, while I've been stuck living on scraps every day. Why couldn't that useless Andrea just make more money?" A draft swept through the corridor as Andrea stood frozen at the door, her whole body chilled to the bone. So they had all been in on it from the start. While she was working herself half to death to cover medical bills and skipping her own breakfasts just to buy Bridget art supplies, they had been laughing at her all along, mocking her foolish sense of duty and her foolish love. How could they be this cruel? They had already drained her dry, yet still spat on her lifeless body behind her back. How laughable, how utterly laughable. She closed her eyes, tears spilling unchecked. The laughter inside continued. Andrea's chest burned as she pushed the door open. The noise cut off abruptly. "You're home, weren't you supposed to be? Working late, right?" Her tear-blurred eyes lifted. She smiled, though her face was wet with tears. "Enjoying the puppet show. Was it entertaining?" Both of their faces went stiff, but Andrea felt nothing but exhaustion bone, deep, endless exhaustion. Clenching her fists, she walked straight into her room. From a hidden compartment in the cabinet, she pulled out the marriage license. There was also a photo. In the photo, the two of them gazed at each other with eyes full of love. She stared at it blankly, her chest tightened until she could barely breathe. Biting her lip, she grabbed the document and rushed back out into the downpour. This charade needed to end. She took a cab all the way to the villa, her hand trembling as she pressed the doorbell. Dorothy answered, her expression flickering with surprise. "Why are you here?" Andrea's gaze slipped past her, finding Alexander in the background, his eyes dark. Pain stabbed through her heart. She lifted the marriage license in her hand. "We started dating in college for 3 years. We got married after graduation, and that was another 3 years. You promised me a perfect home. What's wrong? Can't bring yourself to admit it now." Her head swam from the hours in the rain, but she pushed on, desperate to make things clear. Alexander only looked at the marriage license with detached indifference, and a chill spread through her chest. Then Dorothy let out a derisive laugh. "I tried to spare you some dignity, but you just won't stop forcing yourself in, will you? We got our marriage license 3 years ago." Andrea froze. Dorothy lifted her own marriage license, waving it mockingly in front of her. "Yours doesn't even have an official seal. That so-called marriage license isn't even real." Chapter 4. Andrea heard Alexander's voice from behind. "You're using a fake marriage license to spin your lies. Do you really take me for a fool?" Her eyes went lifeless as she looked at his cold, unfeeling face, and suddenly it all came back to her. 6 years ago, when they registered their marriage, the machine broke, and the license never received its official seal. The clerk told them to come back another day. But after that, he was always too busy, always putting it off. He told her they didn't need a stamp to prove their love. And she had believed him. A bitter, colorless smile pulled at her lips. Her chest felt like it was drowning under icy seawater, choking and crushing her, but no more tears would come. "No, I'm the fool." Lightning split the sky, and the entire city lit for a fleeting moment. Andrea stumbled through the rain, soaked streets, ragged and disoriented, her mind spinning in a haze as shards of memory pierced through. She had grown up in an orphanage, with no family and no one to love her. To escape, she studied tirelessly, relying on scholarships and loans, to attend college. And in college, she met Alexander. He saw the loneliness hidden in her paintings, broke into her guarded world, taught her to open up, and taught her what love meant. She truly believed he was the only light in her otherwise cold and desolate life. She gave him everything, without fear, without holding anything back. But after his death, All he left behind was $800,000 in debt. She sold everything she owned and worked herself to the point of exhaustion to pay it back. She never allowed herself to get sick, never dared take even a single day off. She forced herself to be invincible, all so she could hold up his family in his absence. Those burdens were shackles she carried day after day, and she had survived only by clinging to the memory of his love. But now she knew it had all been a lie. Even the love he showed her had been a lie. The torrential rain tore her past wide open, raw and merciless, as if the memories themselves bled out into the storm. Her chest ached with unbearable pain. Her vision blurred. Then, as a stranger brushed past, her body gave way and she collapsed in the rain. Voices cried out around her, but she heard nothing. When she woke again, she was in the hospital. The rain outside had stopped. "You collapsed on the street with a high fever. Someone brought you in. If you keep pushing yourself, it'll turn into meningitis." The doctor warned, flipping through her chart. "But I suppose you won't take time off." Her eyes stared blankly, unfocused. After a long silence, she finally raised her head. "No, write me a sick leave note. I need to rest." She was too tired. The doctor gave her a long look but said nothing. He filled out the form. "And one more thing, your mother. In-law's surgery can't be delayed. The longer you wait, the more dangerous it becomes. Surgery fees." Her chest twisted sharply. She let out a bitter laugh. "Talk to her daughter. Rebecca and I have nothing to do with each other anymore." Walking out of the hospital, she wandered the quiet afternoon streets in a daze. She couldn't even remember how long it had been since she had strolled like this without rushing. Her chest tightened as she approached home, but when she reached the door, she froze. The gate was open, and her belongings were piled outside. Bridget tossed out her last painting and dusted off her hands. "Since you finally know the truth, pack up and get out. This house is in Alex's name anyway." Andrea stared at the painting. It was the piece that had sealed her love with Alexander. No matter how poor she had never been willing to sell it. Now it lay in the dirt. Her chest burned as she lifted her eyes to Bridget. "I paid most of this mortgage. By law, half of it belongs to me." Bridget sneered. "Sue me then. Oh, right, you're broke." At that, she slammed the door in Andrea's face. Andrea stood there, nails digging into her palms. After a while, she let out a hollow, bitter laugh. She couldn't even tell if she was mocking their cruelty or her own stupidity. With little money left, she found a cheap motel nearby. Feverish and alone, she curled under thin sheets, sobbing like the orphaned child she had once been. 2 days later, the fever finally broke. She steadied herself, gathered what strength she had, and went back to work. The moment she walked in, the general manager, Ryan Calhoun, summoned her. "Haley will now handle the Blue Wave Group project," he said flatly. Andrea's hands clenched tight. "Why?" His expression hardened. "Because Mr. Wilkinson personally requested you be removed. Otherwise, the partnership ends here." Chapter 5. Pain stabbed through Andrea's chest. She gritted her teeth, forcing out a hoarse voice. "But I haven't made a single mistake at work." "That's true. But in this line of business, you should know that sometimes one word is enough to erase everything, even if you've done nothing wrong." Ryan said calmly, "I don't know what you did to offend Mr. Wilkinson, and I don't care. But if you threaten this company's interests, I'll fire you without hesitation, no matter how good you are." His words were final. At the stairwell, Andrea clutched her phone, lips drained of color. "Do you really have to be this ruthless?" On the phone, Alexander's voice was flat and detached. "I just don't want you destroying my family." "Destroying your family?" She let out a bitter laugh, the ache in her chest surging uncontrollably. "You destroyed mine. You knew I had no family of my own. I treated yours like they were mine. I gave everything, tried to protect them from any hardship. And all of it was shattered by your lies. Alexander, do you really not feel a single thing for me?" Her voice cracked, trembling with the sobs she tried to choke back. After a pause, his voice dropped like ice. No, every second with you was suffocating. I'm happy with Dorothy now, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep you away from my life. The color drained from her face. She tried to speak, but her voice was cut short by a distant interruption. Honey, who are you talking to? Andrea froze. Before she could react, the line went dead. The busy tone echoed through the stairwell, each beep slicing deeper into her chest. She walked back to her desk, stiff and hollow. Haley smirked, voice dripping with mockery. Got caught trying to sleep your way up, huh? Now you've lost the man, the deal, and your dignity. Tell me, don't you think that's pathetic? Haley smirked as she threw the jab, but then noticed Andrea slowly lift her head, her eyes rimmed red and glassy. Yes, I am pathetic. She was pathetic for believing in his lies all these years, and still hoping there might be something left to salvage. Andrea shut her eyes in despair, tears finally streaming down her face. After a long moment, she tightened her fists, forcing herself to look at Haley with raw eyes and a hoarse voice. Lend me some money. Haley froze, then burst out laughing. You, asking me for money? How have you fallen, Miss Baxter? Andrea pressed her lips together, her voice low. Please. Haley arched her brow. How much? At the law firm, Zachary Vasquez pushed up the rim of his glasses. His lips carried a mocking smile, though his eyes were ice cold. I told you long ago, this would never end well for you. Andrea bit her lip, saying nothing. Zachary studied her for a moment before finally looking away. You can reclaim most of the money you spent on his mother and sister with transfer records. Although you paid the mortgage, the house is not in your name. At best, you can recover the payments you made. Her lips had lost all color, her eyes hollow. That's enough. I just want back what's mine. He raised a brow. If you want, I can. No, I'll owe you this time. I'll pay you back one day. She gave a thin, bitter smile. Thank you, Mr. Vasquez, for everything for the orphanage and for the last 3 years. His smile faltered. Much later, he turned his head, his voice lost in the wind. Do you really think the debt between us can ever be repaid? The late autumn wind was sharp, cutting to the bone. Andrea stood at the gates of the villa, shivering. She pulled out her phone and dialed. Alexander's voice came through, icy. I told you, stop bothering me. Her chest tightened with unbearable pain. She drew a shaky breath. Alexander, do we really have to end up like this? His tone dropped. $800,000. That's enough for your efforts in the past few years. She gave a hollow laugh, staring at the closed door. Any hesitation in her heart was gone. Tears blurred her vision as she hung up and pressed the doorbell. When Alexander opened the door and saw her, his face turned to stone. If the compensation isn't enough, I can add more, but don't ever come here again. You misunderstand. Andrea cut him off, forcing a calm she didn't feel as she handed him the papers. His eyes flickered when he saw the bold letters under the dim light. Legal notice. I'm here to sue you. Chapter 6. Inside the villa, the warm orange light could not soften the dead silence. Andrea's hands were clenched, her chest burning with pain, though her face was composed. I've made myself clear. You deceived me for 3 years. I only want back what I gave, money and damages. Dorothy, who had listened the entire time, went pale. She bit down, hard on her lip before storming upstairs. Alexander lit a cigarette. Smoke curled between them as he turned, his voice cold. Did it really have to come to this? Come to this, Andrea gave a hollow laugh. Fine, call it that. I've paid $2,000 a month in mortgage payments. For 6 years and 3 months, so that totals to $150,000. Then, there's the $800,000 debt I cleared. Your mother's medical bills, your sister's tuition and expenses, another $250,000. A total of $1.2 million. Pay now, or we go to court. She laid it out piece by piece, each number carving deeper into her chest. All of it had been bought with her blood and sweat, but to him, it was nothing more than a single day's profit for his company. Alexander's face darkened. He put out the cigarette, his gaze carrying something almost like pain. Sometimes, I wonder if you even have a heart. Her breath caught, and then fury almost made her laugh. She snapped her gaze to Alexander, every word wrung from her bleeding heart. No heart? Alexander, what right do you have to say that to me? His eyes narrowed, shadows pooling in them. After a long pause, he looked away, scribbled a signature on a check, and tossed it onto the table. Fill in whatever amount you want. Take it and get out. Andrea stared at the check, her chest crushed as if a hand was squeezing the air out of her lungs. At last, she picked it up and walked toward the door. But his cold voice followed her. Walk out that door, and from now on, we have nothing to do with each other. A sudden, crushing pain tore through Andrea's chest, as if her heart had been struck by a brutal blow. For the first time in her life, the anguish was beyond words. Her hand tightened hard around the doorknob. From the moment you faked your death 3 years ago, it was already over between us. With that, she pulled the door open and left without looking back. In the days that followed, Andrea found a new place, moved, and went to work. On the surface, life went back to routine. Until the 4th day. She was in the conference room, negotiating with a client, when the door burst open. Rebecca stormed in, her face full of rage. There she is, the woman who seduced my son and is now trying to ruin his marriage. She pointed straight at Andrea. You all know my son, Alexander Wilkinson, CEO of the Blue Wave Group. This woman used work as an excuse to get close to him, even following him home and trying to crawl into his bed. My daughter, law couldn't take it anymore. She's talking about divorce. Is this really the kind of person you want to do business with? Andrea stood frozen in place, feeling the weight of every gaze land on her. Contempt, gossip, disgust, each one lashed across her like an invisible whip, striking again and again. Her spine went rigid as she caught the doubt on the client's face and the darkening expression of Ryan. Her nails dug deep into her palms as she forced herself to stay calm. Do you have any proof that I seduced your son? Of course. Rebecca glared at her, then pulled a piece of lacy lingerie from her bag and flung it onto the table for all to see. She left this behind at my son's house. Chapter 7. The conference room erupted with gasps, and Andrea felt her vision go dark. She could endure slander. She could endure the looks of contempt, but the humiliation of her lingerie being held up for judgment in front of so many eyes tore at her soul. She took a shaky breath and forced the words through clenched teeth. Lingerie can be bought at any department store. How can you prove it's mine? Do you have footage? A recording? That silenced Rebecca for a moment. Andrea closed her eyes, steadying herself, about to speak, when someone exclaimed, "Oh my goodness! Check the trending news." Her heart lurched. She pulled out her phone. The top trending tag read in bold, Andrea Baxter, the most vicious mistress in history. And beneath it, a livestream link. Andrea tapped the screen with stiff fingers. One glance was all it took. Her blood seemed to turn to ice. On screen, Dorothy lay in a hospital bed, wearing a patient's gown, sobbing pitifully. Just a few days ago, she followed me to my home and threatened me. She said if I didn't give her $1.5 million, she would make me lose my baby. She sniffled, then played a recording from the villa's security cameras. The footage showed Andrea leaving with a check in hand. She stormed into my house and made a scene. For my safety, Alex had no choice but to give her money. But I was so shaken I started bleeding. The doctor says my pregnancy is in danger. You think I'd lie? She turned teary eyes to the man beside her, who had been silent the entire time. Alex, tell them, am I telling the truth? Andrea's chest constricted. She stared at him on the screen. After a pause, he lifted his eyes. His expression was cold. It's true. Andrea shut her eyes in despair. Something inside her shattered completely in that moment, splintering into pieces she knew she could never put back together again. The comment section exploded instantly, hundreds of thousands of furious replies flooding in. How disgusting. She must be desperate for a man. I've seen mistresses before, but never one who extorts to force her way in. What a trash. Targeting a pregnant woman, she deserves the worst. The client shot up, chair toppling behind him, his face dark as ice. How dare you bring someone like this to a meeting? Clearly, your company isn't serious about cooperation. Andrea's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to explain, but no one cared to listen. Ryan's tone was cutting. If you can't clean this up in 3 days, don't bother coming back. Her lips pressed together tightly. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught Rebecca smirking with satisfaction, and an icy chill spread through her chest. At home, she dove straight into her files, determined to gather proof. But then came the knock on her door. She opened it, and there Alexander was. His face was cold as stone. I'll give you another $800,000 to leave this city. Her composure cracked, pain crashing through her like a tidal wave. Her voice came out rough, torn. Why? I've done nothing wrong. Why should I be the one to leave? His eyes hardened. Because Dorothy is in the hospital because of you. As long as you're here, she won't have peace. The pain in Andrea's chest was unbearable. Her voice trembled as she asked, So after destroying my dreams, you want to destroy my career too? Tears streamed uncontrollably down her face. Alexander, I won't let you win. His tone dropped, deep and unyielding. You can try. Her chest felt hollowed out completely, the pain no longer even her own. She slammed the door in his face. That night, she gathered every shred of evidence she had, proof of their years together, uploaded it all, and bought a trending news slot. Within moments, the story flipped. The internet roared with debate, her name at the center of a firestorm. She scrolled through the divided comments, preparing to post more when her account suddenly locked. The evidence she had uploaded was wiped in an instant. Andrea tightened her grip on the phone, ready to register a new account, when a fresh headline shot straight to the top of the trending news. Andrea Baxter, prostitute. Chapter 8. For a moment, Andrea's vision swam, and a chill raced through her body. Scrolling down, she saw that a blogger had dug up every dark corner of her past. Her mother was a prostitute. Her father was a thug. After he killed someone, her mom shoved her out onto the street to work with her. She was raised that way. No wonder she grew up sleeping with men. When her mom died, she was sent to an orphanage. She used to pester a young man there every day until he was finally adopted and escaped. And now she's back, trying to seduce Mr. Wilkinson. Some people never change. She's rotten to the bone. She began to tremble. Black, suffocating despair closed around her. These were wounds she had never spoken of aloud. Because of her past, she had endured endless scorn. That was why she changed her name and altered her identity, so no one could ever trace it back to her. The only person she had ever told was Alexander. He had held her close and promised he would keep it secret. He had sworn no one would ever use it against her. Now those honeyed promises were knives thrust into her chest, and she bled. She pressed a hand to her mouth as bile rose. She staggered into the bathroom and vomited until her throat was raw. The physical ache was nothing compared to the hollowing despair inside her. It was like a lethal liquor corroding her heart slowly, while she remained painfully lucid and helpless as the pain spread. That night, Ryan texted her. You don't need to come into the office anymore. Her hands went completely numb. She called back and found she had been blocked. Clutching her phone, she watched the tag on the trending news and felt colder still. She blinked, steadied herself, tried to create a new account to respond only to see the trending topic wiped away in an instant. One by one, the comments disappeared. She froze. Then Zachary called. His tone was sarcastic, cruel. So this is the scumbag you threw everything away for. Your taste is terrible. For some reason. Hearing his voice made her eyes burn. The tears she had been holding and finally tumbled free. For a moment, the air went utterly still, broken only by the muffled sound of her sobs, carried away by the night wind. After a long silence, he sighed softly. If you want to get out of here, come to me. I'll always have your back." Andrea closed her eyes. Pain and gratitude mingled. "Thank you," she whispered. Later that night, Alexander came again. His expression was heavier than it had been before. The trending news came down fast. "You got Zachary involved." Andrea stared at him, her chest tight and suffocating. "And what does that have to do with you?" "Mr. Wilkinson, I have nothing left, only the shame. Isn't that enough? What else do you want? My bones or my blood?" For a moment, something like pain crossed his face. "I never meant for things to go this far," he said. "Tell me what you want. I'll make it right." Her eyes had grown empty. "Make it right? You ruined my future and my past. What can you possibly offer me?" She smiled, but the smile was fractured. "If I die someday, Alexander, it'll be because of you." Her laugh in the darkness was wild and hopeless. He flinched. Does saying that help anything? He inhaled, then added, "Believe me or not, I never intended to harm you. If it would ease you, I'll apologize." An apology. Andrea felt the room tilt. Cold prickled across her skin. One light, meaningless apology and you go back to your perfect life. Me, I have no life left. Her voice dropped to a hoarse whisper. "I won't let this go. I'll gather every piece of evidence and sue you. No matter how long it takes, I'll make you pay." Alexander cut her off sharply. "I have more than enough money to wear you down. When you've burned through all that money, what then?" She looked up, startled. He continued, voice flat and merciless. "You'll have nothing, no family, no friends. What could you possibly do to make me pay?" Chapter 9. Andrea's body suddenly turned cold, and the intense pain twisting in her chest made her vision go black. She clenched her fists and gritted her teeth, saying, "You and your sister, you really are a family." After speaking, she turned to go inside, but her wrist was suddenly grabbed. Alexander blocked her way, his gaze colder than the night. "I still have some patience left. I can give you some money. You can go to another city or even abroad. Once my patience runs out, you won't even get the last bit of compensation." At this moment, the Alexander in her memory, the boy who had led her out of loneliness, was completely unrecognizable after these words. Andrea's heart ached as if twisted, and she suddenly broke free from his hand. When the door closed, it separated them into two different worlds. After the trending topic was removed, all discussions about Andrea were deleted. Everything seemed to return to normal. But only Andrea knew that nothing was truly over. Nothing had passed. No company would ever want her again. Even on the street, she could always hear quiet whispers. Murderer's daughter. Child prostitute. Everything she had desperately tried to escape from, spent more than a decade trying to forget, now reappeared before her eyes. Unspeakable humiliation and despair pushed the last bit of her sanity into darkness. She buried her head and walked quickly back, but a figure blocked her. "Way." Dorothy looked at her and sneered. "The way you struggle on the verge of collapse is truly laughable." Andrea closed her eyes, clenched her fists, and tried to walk around her. But Dorothy quickly stepped in front of her. The autumn wind was bleak, and her voice was just as cold. "Still staying here. You don't actually think Alex still cares about you, that you still have a chance, do you?" Andrea stopped in her tracks. "Since I have no chance, why did you come to find me?" Dorothy's expression changed, then she laughed again. "What makes you so confident to say that? You think he ever loved you? Don't make me laugh." She looked at Andrea, her smile bold and triumphant. "Before you two got married, he came to me and said that if I wanted to be with him, he would break up with you immediately." Andrea felt as if she had been punched in the face. She suddenly looked up at Dorothy. Dorothy laughed. "On the day you got your marriage certificate, he knew the machine was broken and deliberately didn't get the stamp, just in case I regretted it." Andrea instinctively clenched her hands, her heart aching so much she could barely breathe. All her questions were answered in that moment. He kept making excuses to delay getting the certificate, just to wait for her to say she regretted it. That's right. If someone truly wanted to marry you, How could they not even find time to get the certificate? Yet at that time, she couldn't see it. Looking at her pale face, Dorothy spoke with disdain. I know you're unwilling to accept it, but your unwillingness will only end up hurting the people around you. Andrea was suddenly stunned. She looked up, only to see Dorothy turning and getting into her car. Andrea, you will never be able to beat me. With that, she started the car and drove away. Watching the car disappear into the distance, a sense of foreboding swept over her like a chill. Andrea clenched her hands and hurried toward Zachary's office. Just as she reached the door, she saw that everything inside had been cleared out, and several employees were carrying things outside. Andrea stood frozen as if struck by lightning, Dorothy's words echoing in her mind. Hurting the people around you. Her chest felt as if a huge stone was pressing down, making it hard to breathe. Zachary walked up to her with a nonchalant look, pretending to be relaxed. Running an office is exhausting. It's a good chance to take a break. Andrea's voice was hoarse. Was it Dorothy and her people who did this? For once, Zachary fell silent and said nothing, but the answer was already clear. This time, she hadn't just hurt herself, she had hurt the people around her too. What was she still holding on to? Actually, I lost a long time ago, completely and utterly. Bitterness, like leaves swirling in the air, overwhelmed her. Andrea trembled as she closed her eyes. Zachary, take me away. Chapter 10. Villa. Alexander's expression darkened. I told you, I will handle it. Is your way of handling it just to keep seeing her? Dorothy bit her lip tightly. I helped you deal with her, what's so bad about that? Alexander's brows furrowed slightly. She can leave, but not with Zachary. Because you two almost broke up because of him. Alexander's expression turned cold. Tears shimmered in Dorothy's eyes. Didn't you say you have no feelings for her at all? Why do you still care who she leaves with? Once she's gone, it'll be just you and me, and I'll only have you. Isn't that good? Alexander looked at her tears, moved for a moment, but his brows remained tightly furrowed. Dorothy gazed into his eyes, and hatred began to grow within her tears. In the following days, Andrea sold everything she could. Just like when Alexander faked his death years ago, she sold it all. But last time it was because she loved him. This time, it was because she was leaving. On the day she left, Alexander came. The car window rolled down, his eyes cold and distant. I'll take you to the airport. She stared at him for a moment, then got into the car. The vehicle slowly drove along the lakeside, and the morning breeze made Andrea's eyes red. She looked at the scenery outside the window, suppressing her emotions, but couldn't help speaking. So, I was always just a substitute to keep you company when she wasn't around, was I? He had Dorothy in his heart, yet still came to provoke her. He gave her hope, only to let her experience despair. She should have known long ago that love, for her, was as illusory as bubbles in the sunlight. It would never truly belong to her, yet she still dared to dream. All those details of love, the beautiful moments together, were they all lies too? You had planned everything from the start, just waiting for Dorothy's command so you could walk away unscathed, watching me struggle alone in the darkness. And it didn't matter to you, did it? Andrea's voice was visibly choked, her heart aching as if someone was gripping it tightly. Alexander looked ahead indifferently. Does any of this still matter? Yes, at this point, does it still matter? Andrea's heart was numb from pain, and she couldn't even shed tears anymore. She bit her lip and said, Stop the car. There's nothing left for us to say. Alexander acted as if he hadn't heard, only replying coldly, But you have things to say to Zachary. Andrea felt cold inside and out, holding back her tears as she retorted, Does any of this still matter to you? Alexander's gaze suddenly turned icy. It doesn't matter. The car stopped abruptly, but the door wouldn't open no matter what. Andrea asked warily, What are you going to do? The ticket is already bought. I'll take you somewhere where Zachary is. Alexander said coldly, I don't like giving things I've used to others. Things he's used. Andrea closed her eyes in despair. She thought her heart could gradually grow cold, but hearing those words still cut her like a blade, the pain unbearable. She clenched her teeth, trying to struggle out of the car. Alexander was about to say something else, but his pupils suddenly contracted. "Watch out." Andrea froze and turned her head, only to be blinded by a sudden beam of light. The next moment, her body was violently thrown, the world spinning as she crashed heavily to the ground. Amid the violent crash, Andrea felt pain radiate from every part of her body. Through blurred vision, she saw Alexander rush to the car and carry Dorothy out. Dorothy whispered something weakly in his ear. He turned and, through the thick smoke, his eyes met Andrea's bloodied figure from afar. In those eyes surged endless conflict. After a moment, he gritted his teeth, lowered his gaze, and carried Dorothy away. In Andrea's despairing gaze, he walked toward the hospital without a trace of regret. Once again, he abandoned her. Bitterness flooded over her like a tide, and Andrea trembled as she closed her eyes. In a daze, she seemed to hear Zachary's voice, filled with indescribable fear and pain. "Don't die, Andrea, don't die." Someone held her in their arms, her hand tightly gripped by a cold hand. Broken tears fell on her face, but she could no longer open her eyes. In the haze, she seemed to return to the orphanage. When Zachary was a child, he would smile and play in front of her, promising they'd never be apart. In the end, the only one by her side was him. Back then, everything was so good. If she could do it all over again, she would never want to meet Alexander. Darkness completely engulfed her, and a bone, chilling cold invaded her body and soul. All the sounds around her vanished in an instant, leaving only deathly silence. Suddenly, a sharp cry rang in her ears. Andrea suddenly opened her eyes. In an instant, the amplified noise, the crying, all flooded into her ears. She gasped for air, breaking free from suffocating darkness. Looking around in confusion, she found everything was snow, white, and there was a corpse on the hospital bed. What was going on? Wasn't she already dead? Before she could react, she saw Rebecca and Bridget standing beside her, sobbing. Bridget was wearing her high school uniform, and their faces and hairstyles were just as they were 3 years ago. Andrea's eyes widened, and an unbelievable thought suddenly rose in her heart. She had returned to 3 years ago. At that moment, Bridget walked over to her, crying, "Drea, if you're so sad, don't come with us to the crematorium." Andrea glanced at the corpse, suddenly wanting to laugh, though her eyes were completely red. Last time, it was on the way to the crematorium that Bridget switched Alexander, wasn't it? This time, Andrea took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. "No, I want to light the fire myself and send him off one last time." Chapter 11. As soon as these words were spoken, both Bridget and Rebecca's faces changed, and they even forgot to pretend to cry. Andrea forced out 2 tears and turned to look at them. "He always used to say he was afraid of being alone, and asked me to stay with him until the very end. I will make sure to watch him go into the furnace, watch him turn to ashes, and then take his ashes home. I will never let him feel lonely." Rebecca and Bridget exchanged a glance, and both saw panic in each other's eyes. Bridget bit her lip and said, "The crematorium is unlucky. Mom and I can go. Drea, your health isn't good. I'm afraid you'll catch a cold and get sick." "It's all right. Alex loved me so much when he was alive. How could I not see him off just because I'm afraid of getting sick?" Andrea lowered her head and wiped away non-existent tears, covering her eyes to hide the hatred and amusement within them. Before they could speak in panic again, she walked to the window, sobbing, and glanced outside. "The hearse is here." After saying this, she walked to the body and, grief-stricken, said, "Alex, may you have a peaceful journey." Bridget and Rebecca anxiously paced behind her. Just as they were about to speak, the crematorium staff had already entered. "Please accept our condolences." Ignoring the 2 pale, faced women behind her, Andrea said to the staffel, "My husband loved cleanliness when he was alive. Please take him to be cremated quickly so his body doesn't decay and look unsightly after death. The staff responded repeatedly, took out a stretcher, and quickly carried the body onto the hearse. Andrea followed and got into the car, turning to look at Rebecca and Bridget. "What's wrong?" Rebecca panicked. "What should we do? We can't really let my son be cremated, can we?" Bridget wiped the cold sweat from her forehead. "Don't worry, I booked this hearse. It won't go to the crematorium." Rebecca let out a long sigh of relief and got into the car with Bridget. Bridget was calculating how to get Andrea out of the way when they switched the body. But the further the car drove, the more she felt something was wrong. She had clearly arranged for the car to go to the southern crematorium, but it was heading all the way to the north of the city. Where are we going?" Andrea said sorrowfully. "Alex loved Bob Dylan's Girl from the North Country the most, so I specially chose the northern crematorium for him." This hearse was the one she had arranged before her rebirth. In her previous life, she was overwhelmed by grief and was tricked by Bridget into letting them take Alexander in the car they had arranged. This time, she would not be deceived. Bridget's body stiffened, and she hurriedly waved her hand. No, the southern crematorium is better. Please take us back." Andrea blinked and looked at the staff member beside her. "Is that so?" The staff frowned and assured, "That's absolutely impossible. Our crematorium is fast and efficient. Please rest assured." As they spoke, the car had already arrived outside the crematorium. The staff hurriedly took the body out, while Bridget and Rebecca anxiously followed Andrea into the cremation room. The staff took out a piece of paper. "A family member needs to sign for the cremation. Could someone please sign?" Rebecca's eyes lit up. "No, we won't sign. I think it's better to take my son back to our hometown for burial." "Rebecca," Andrea interrupted her. "Did you forget? You said before Alex died that he insisted on being cremated and having his ashes scattered to the wind so he could be free. We can't just follow your wishes and ignore your son, can we?" With that, she ignored Rebecca's panicked expression, handed over their forged documents to the staff, and signed her name. "I'm the deceased's wife. I'll sign. Please proceed with the cremation quickly." The staff nodded. "Family members, please wait in the lounge next door." Andrea glanced at the haggard, pale Bridget and Rebecca and said with concern, "Let's go. Alex wouldn't want to see you so sad." Bridget and Rebecca anxiously racked their brains for a way to stop this. But Andrea turned to the staff. "Can I press the ignition button?" The staff hesitated for a moment. "Sorry, that's not allowed according to the rules." Andrea bit her lip and lowered her eyes in disappointment. Thinking she was overcome with grief, the staff added, "However, you can personally push him into the furnace." Andrea's eyes lit up instantly, but she quickly concealed it. "I'd like to say one more thing to him. Is that all right?" The staff nodded and guided her to Alexander's side. Andrea's lips curled slightly. She bent down and whispered in Alexander's ear, so only the two of them could hear, "Goodbye, Alexander." After saying this, she was about to push him into the furnace. At the door, Rebecca wailed and fainted. Andrea didn't stop, but suddenly a hand grabbed her wrist. She looked down and saw Alexander open his eyes, a cold light shining in them as he looked at her. "Do you really want me dead that much?" Chapter 12. The scene was as silent as death. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the stillness. "Ah, it's a corpse coming back to life," a staff member screamed as they ran out. Andrea quietly watched Alexander, a flash of coldness passing through her eyes, though her face betrayed nothing. She only stared at him in shock, trembling and unable to speak. Weren't you dead? Briddy said you were in a car accident. Are you dead or alive?" Alexander gazed at her with a deep, somber look. For a moment, it seemed as if she knew everything, but her reaction now did not seem like an act. In the midst of the standoff, several staff members rushed in, holding the death certificate angrily. "This report is a fake. You're committing murder." "A fake?" Andrea stared blankly at Alexander, then suddenly burst out in anger. "You all teamed up to deceive me." Alexander fell silent. Bridget hurried forward and said, "It must be a mistake by the hospital. It's the hospital." Andrea took the death certificate. "Fine, then let's go to the hospital right now and sue them. If Alex hadn't suddenly woken up, he would have been burned to death by now." The faces of the Wilkinson family members all changed. This. They had bribed a nurse to get this certificate. If Andrea investigated, wouldn't everything be exposed? Bridget bit her lip and looked at Alexander, whose face was dark and gloomy. Andrea frowned and said, "Why are you looking at him? You should go to the hospital. Could he have issued his own death certificate? Who would be stupid enough to do something like that?" Her words were full of implication. Alexander's eyes darkened. If he still didn't realize Andrea knew everything, he would be a fool. He glanced around and said in a low voice, "If you want to make a scene, do it at home. Don't embarrass yourselves here." "What? Are you afraid of losing face now?" Andrea let out a cold laugh, looking at Alexander's grim expression, but then changed the subject. "Fine, let's talk it out at home." The journey home was shrouded in silence. Bridget and Rebecca looked uneasy, their plan having been seen through. Alexander, on the other hand, watched Andrea, whose expression was calm as she gazed out the window, his eyes filled with a strange emotion. By all rights, Andrea shouldn't have suspected anything. The coldness in her goodbye was absolutely real. Where had things gone wrong? The Andrea before him now felt unfamiliar. Each of them returned home, lost in their own thoughts. As soon as the door closed, Andrea spoke bluntly, "Let's get a divorce." Rebecca and Bridget were both stunned. After a long silence, Alexander's eyes darkened as he said, "Reason. Faking your death to deceive me, isn't that reason enough?" Andrea clenched her hands tightly, looked up at Alexander, and a cold smile curled at the corner of her lips. "I'm guessing you have another woman out there, right? Faking your death was just a way to go see her." Bridget was startled. "How did you?" She had just started to speak when she suddenly realized something and covered her mouth. "How did I know?" Andrea said with self-mockery. "The scent of perfume. Lipstick marks aren't those obvious enough?" "You always have some excuse, and I said I believed you, but don't take me for a fool." Alexander's gaze darkened, a strange blockage in his heart, and he pressed his lips together in silence. There was a faint mockery in Andrea's eyes, though she could no longer tell if it was directed at Alexander or herself. "Alexander, do you think I love you so much that I'd still grovel even if you have someone else? Maybe I did once, but not anymore." She took a deep breath, looking into Alexander's gradually darkening eyes. "From now on, I won't love you anymore. You don't need to fake your death to escape. You're free now." Chapter 13. Alexander's gaze paused. This should have been the ending he desired most. Yet at this moment, there was not a trace of joy in his heart. Bridget excitedly wrapped her arms around his. "Alex, you have to agree, it's not easy to finally get rid of her." Without waiting for Alexander to respond, she arrogantly turned to Andrea and said, "But there's no need to get a divorce. After all, the marriage certificate is fake, so it doesn't matter either way." "Bridie," Alexander interrupted her coldly. Bridget was stunned by his harshness. "I didn't say anything wrong. You were the one who said you didn't want to marry her in the first place." Alexander pressed his thin lips into a line, inexplicably turning his head to look at Andrea. Andrea bit her lip, pretending to look wounded. "Even the marriage certificate is fake. How much have you lied to me?" Alexander lowered his gaze, looking into her tear-filled eyes, and felt a sudden pain in his heart. Andrea took a deep breath and forced herself to sound strong. "Since you dislike me so much, I don't need to be in your way anymore. I don't want anything from the house. You can throw it all away if you want." With that, she covered her face, sobbing as she ran out the door. "Andrea," Alexander pursed his lips, wanting to chase after her. Bridget grabbed his arm. "Alex, your girlfriend is still waiting for you." Alexander stopped in his tracks, looking conflicted as he glanced at Andrea's retreating figure. His hands clenched tightly at his sides. "I understand." Downstairs, Andrea saw that Alexander hadn't come after her and breathed a sigh of relief. She took out her phone, transferred all her funds into her own account, and then severed the relationship card with Alexander. She looked up at the sky, calculating that in her previous life, the creditor for that $800,000 debt had also come knocking today. Just as she was thinking this, several cars drove up from afar and stopped in front of her. Several burly men got out of the cars, looking menacing as they asked, "Don't block the way. Do you know which floor Alexander lives on?" Andrea pointed upstairs. 508. Then she kindly reminded them, "There's an external circuit breaker in the stairwell on the 5th floor." In her previous life, after Alexander faked his death, his company couldn't repay the $800,000 he had borrowed due to losses. It was these same creditors who came to the house, smashed everything, and took away all their belongings. Every day, they cut off their water and electricity to force them to pay. Rebecca and Bridget were the first to break down, crying and begging her every day to pay up. She had no choice but to sell the studio. After the debt was paid, they still blamed her for selling it too late. "It's just $800,000, isn't it? Look at how much trouble you made out of it. So useless. If you could pay it back, why didn't you do it sooner? Did you make us suffer on purpose?" Looking back, it was rather ironic. They had never respected her, yet she had risked everything to protect them. Andrea watched the creditors' backs as they went upstairs, a faint smile on her lips. This time, without her, how would Alexander repay that $800,000? She was quite curious to see, but not right now. She turned and walked toward the studio. As soon as she reached the door, she smelled the familiar scent of paint. In an instant, it felt as if everything around her was rewinding. At this moment, it truly felt like she had been reborn. She looked at the familiar faces and the familiar room, her eyes instantly reddening. It had been 3 years since she last held a paintbrush. "Drea, you finally came. Someone wanted to collaborate with you and has been waiting here for several days." A girl hurried over, but paused when she saw Andrea's eyes. "What's wrong?" Andrea remembered this girl. She was her junior, Olivia Davis, who had worked in her studio ever since graduating. She quickly wiped away her tears. "It's nothing. Where is that person now?" Olivia snapped back to reality and was about to speak when a voice came from behind. "It's me." Andrea stiffened all over and turned around abruptly. In the glow of the evening clouds, the wind fluttered the hem of his clothes. His features were as dazzling as the summer sun, and the pride and disdain in his eyes seemed to freeze time itself. Blood everywhere. A vivid red flashed before Andrea's eyes once again. Someone's tears fell onto her face, so cold they seemed to seep into her bones. A frightened, sobbing, pleading voice echoed in her ears. "Don't die, please don't die." At this moment, that voice and the face before her gradually overlapped. "Andrea, long time no see." Chapter 14. "What, don't you recognize me?" Zachary looked at her dazed expression, his gaze somewhat cold. "Well, I suppose after Alexander came along, you must have long forgotten your old companions." He let out a cold snort and turned to leave. Andrea gently tugged at his sleeve, her voice a little choked. "It's been a long time, Zachary." The orange, yellow sunset poured into the studio through the glass window. The smile at the corner of her lips was faint and bitter, and her eyes shimmered as if with tears. Zachary's gaze paused, and the coldness in his eyes gradually faded. He looked away, and after a long moment repeated, "It's been a long time, Andrea." His voice was light, swept away by the evening breeze. "Why did you suddenly come back to the country?" By the lake, the street artist's violin played melodiously. Andrea sat leaning against the railing, the night wind brushing through her hair, as ripples spread in circles across the lake's surface. Zachary smiled teasingly, his tone a bit stiff. "What? You don't want to see me?" His words always carried a sting. Andrea had long grown used to it and replied calmly, "If I said yes, would you be furious?" Zachary took a deep breath, his grip on the railing tightening. Andrea said, "So why ask that question?" She lifted her eyes, gazing deeply into Zachary's. "You should know. You mean something very special to me. I could never not want to see you." Her background was very unusual. She had no family, no friends. After her mother died, she could only go to the orphanage. Back then, she was withdrawn and nobody liked her. Only Zachary would notice her sitting in a neglected corner. When other children were adopted, he would secretly hide a piece of candy from the adoptive parents, gifts, and share it with her. In her life, Zachary and Alexander were always the most special, even after Zachary was adopted and they were separated for 10 years. But every time they met, the image of Zachary in the orphanage, holding candy and tilting his head with a smile, would come alive in her mind once again. Zachary saw the look in her eyes as she drifted into memories, and it seemed he was drawn into them as well. "You should know, you're special too." During those days when they huddled together for warmth, she was the most unforgettable presence. "Really?" Andrea gazed at the myriad lights reflected on the lake, her eyes growing distant. "So, why did you leave 3 years ago?" They had reunited 5 years ago, but then 3 years ago, Zachary left the country without a word. The next time they met was already in another lifetime. At that time, Olivia had also mentioned someone wanted to collaborate with her, but she was so busy with Alexander's affairs that she had no time to care. Afterwards, she sold the studio, and they had even less contact. Later, when Zachary opened his own studio, she learned he had returned to the country. Zachary's gaze paused, looking at Andrea with a complicated expression, as if he wanted to say something but the words caught in his throat. He only said lightly, "Do you care?" There was a hint of hidden sadness in his tone. Andrea's brow twitched, not understanding where his sadness came from. She was about to ask when a sudden voice interrupted her. "Drea, you're my sister-in-law. We're being beaten by debt collectors, and you're here flirting with another man." She turned her head and saw Bridget standing behind her, looking as if she'd just caught someone in the act. The moment Alexander saw Zachary, his face turned so dark it was almost frightening. Andrea looked at the two of them and saw bruises on their faces, clearly from being beaten by debt collectors. They were in a truly sorry state. It was just a pity they hadn't been beaten hard enough. In a good mood, she said, "Young lady, don't talk nonsense. Your sister-in-law is someone else." Bridget's face turned pale and green. She truly looked down on Andrea, but thinking of the debt, she held back. She bit her lip and took out the marriage certificate. "Everything I said today was just out of anger. This is your marriage certificate with Alex. You two are definitely married, so the company's debt is joint debt, and you have to pay it." Andrea looked at the marriage certificate and suddenly laughed. She noticed the strange looks from Alexander and Bridget, and pulled the marriage certificate from Bridget's hand. Just like Dorothy had done in her previous life, she waved the marriage certificate in front of Alexander, her gaze full of disdain. "There's not even a stamp on it. Your marriage certificate is so fake." Chapter 15. Zachary's eyes suddenly lit up. Alexander's gaze was deep. "If you're angry because we didn't get the marriage certificate and want a divorce, I can go with you to City Hall first thing tomorrow morning." Andrea looked at him strangely. "Why would I want to register our marriage? So I can inherit the $800,000 you owe." Alexander fell silent. Andrea laughed. "And if you really loved me, how could it be that after 3 years, you still haven't found the time to get the certificate?" "Don't take me for a fool, Alexander." Bridget bit her lip tightly. "But for these 3 years, all of Alex's money has gone to you. You should at least pay him back a bit, otherwise how are we supposed to repay the debt?" "No problem." Andrea interrupted her and looked over at Zachary. "Perfect, my lawyer is here. We'll settle it then." She winked at Zachary, and he immediately understood. "Tomorrow, I'll make sure everything is calculated clearly for you." Bridget wanted to say something more, but Zachary shot her a cold. Look. What? Was I not clear enough just now, still trying to force a marriage? Haven't you read the Constitution? His face wasn't sharp, and his eyes, always slightly upturned at the corners, seemed to look at everyone with both affection and disdain. Clearly a charming and flirtatious face, but once he stopped smiling, it became especially oppressive and cold. Bridget was suddenly stunned, biting her lip in frustration as she shrank behind Alexander. Alexander watched the whole scene in silence, his deep gaze lingering on Zachary's face for a moment before turning to Andrea. He's back, so you want to cut ties with me? Andrea paused, not understanding why he suddenly brought up Zachary, but facing Alexander, she saw no need to explain. Yes. Zachary couldn't help but smile, raising his eyebrows at Alexander, his eyes full of provocation and pride. Alexander pressed his lips together, and the air around him seemed to grow heavier. You really haven't changed at all. Andrea was stunned again and turned to look at Zachary. Zachary immediately put away his smile and looked at her innocently, as if he didn't understand what Alexander was talking about either. Andrea looked away, only feeling that Alexander was acting strange today, not speaking like himself. But she wasn't in the mood to argue, so she turned and said, "If there's nothing else, I should get going." Bridget hurriedly called after her, "Wait, you have to pay the money." "Don't worry, I'm not like some scumbags who cheat people out of money and lies." Alexander's face instantly darkened. Andrea took a few steps, then turned back and said, "Oh, right, your brother will find a way to handle that $800,000. She glanced at Alexander, her eyes curving into a smile. "It just depends on whether he's willing to do it for you." That $800,000 debt was what Alexander owed after draining all his companies and investing. In the previous life, he made a fortune with that investment and acquired the Blue Wave Group. But that was half a year later. If he withdrew now, he'd lose everything. Alexander's face darkened. He had never told anyone about this investment, not even Dorothy. How could Andrea possibly know? He watched Andrea and Zachary walking side by side, feeling a deep ache in his heart as he clenched his fists in secret. Downstairs at the hotel, Andrea stopped in her tracks. "All right, this is far enough. You should head back now." Zachary hesitated for a moment. "You and Alexander," he started to speak but didn't finish. Andrea looked at him in confusion. As their eyes met, Zachary suddenly laughed and said lightly, "We were supposed to be out discussing a business collaboration today." Andrea snapped back to reality. "That's right, but why would a law firm want to collaborate with an art studio?" she asked, puzzled. "Design a logo, but we don't take on that kind of work." As she spoke, she took out her phone. "But I know a few designers. I can put you in touch with them." She was scrolling through WhatsApp when suddenly, a hand covered her screen. Andrea looked up and met a pair of deep, intense eyes. Zachary's gaze was dark and mysterious. "But I never said I was opening a law firm." Chapter 16. Andrea felt a sudden jolt in her heart. The atmosphere had been so relaxed just now that she had let her guard down and forgotten it was still 3 years ago. At this time, Zachary had just returned to the country, and his carcer here hadn't even started yet. A chill slowly crept up from the depths of her heart. She clenched her hands, forcing herself to calm down. "Because you studied law before, I thought you would open a law firm. Isn't that right?" Zachary lowered his eyes and smiled. "I've wanted to be a lawyer since. I've wanted to be a lawyer since I was a child. Of course, coming back means opening a law firm. Just kidding, don't be so nervous." Andrea's hand, which had been wiping away cold sweat, froze instantly. She looked at Zachary's smiling face, and the more she looked, the more she felt like punching it. "So, what exactly do you want to cooperate with the studio on?" Zachary said, "There's an artist abroad holding an exhibition, and he wants to collect paintings from different regions. He happened to ask me if I knew any outstanding artists, and you came to mind." "Paintings from different regions?" Andrea suddenly looked at him, her eyes full of anticipation. "What's the name of that artist?" "Damon Howarth," Zachary replied. "Do you know him, so do you agree to cooperate?" "Of course." Andrea clutched her chest, unable to contain her joy. In her previous life, Damon's exhibition had gained recognition from all top-tier artists. Every artist selected saw their reputation rise by more than one level. For the second exhibition, everyone was desperate to have their work displayed. During the domestic tour in her previous life, she had looked at those paintings on the wall with deep envy. She had secretly wished that her own work could be displayed there one day. She never imagined that she had actually missed such an opportunity. Andrea suddenly choked up, her eyes involuntarily turning red. She held back the sting in her nose and said, "I will definitely hang my best painting in the exhibition." Zachary looked at her and smiled. "Come on, it's not that touching, is it?" Andrea shook her head. "Thank you, really." Zachary was silent for a moment, his gaze growing deeper. "After all you owe me, just a thank you." Andrea was stunned, looking at him in confusion. In her previous life, he had said something similar. "What you owe me, can you ever repay it?" There always seemed to be a hint of forbearance in his eyes, but what exactly did she owe him? Andrea was just about to ask, but Zachary turned and walked away in silence, waving his hand at her. "I'm leaving. Remember to show your best skills. His assessment is really tough." Andrea watched his figure gradually disappear into the darkness, a strange feeling spreading through her entire body. At that moment, her phone chimed. It was a message from Alexander. "So, you don't want this either." In the photo was the painting she had made the first time she met Alexander. It might have meant a lot to her once, but now. Andrea let out a mocking laugh, typed a few words in reply, put away her phone, and walked into the hotel. Elsewhere, the debt collectors took away everything of value from the house, kicking over a chair at the door. Before leaving, one of them snarled, "Consider these the interest. If you can't come up with the money in 3 days, I'll go to the police and you'll end up in the morgue." With that, he slammed the door shut. Rebecca collapsed onto the sofa, her deep wrinkles filled with tears. Looking at the debris scattered across the floor from the debt collectors' rampage, she cried out, "What a sin, what a sin! What kind of wife did you marry? When disaster struck, she just flew away on her own." Bridget looked at the broken paintbrushes on the floor, her face also troubled. She said anxiously, "Alex, Andrea said you had a way to pay them back. What exactly is your plan?" Alexander just stared at the painting in his hand, saying nothing. Then he received a reply on his phone. His fingers paused and he quickly opened it. There was only a single line. "Just throw it away. It's trash anyway." Chapter 17. Alexander tightened his grip on the phone. It felt as if he had been punched hard in the chest, a dull ache spreading from his heart. He typed out a reply, but the moment it was sent, he saw only one single gray tick. A sudden heaviness clogged Alexander's chest, and he closed his phone weakly. The next day, in the studio, golden sunlight poured into the room, and the snow, white curtains fluttered gently in the breeze. Andrea stepped back, looking at the sketched outline on the canvas, dissatisfied no matter how she looked at it. After 3 years without painting, she was still out of practice. At that moment, Olivia pushed open the door and poked her head in. "Drea, that person from yesterday is here again." Andrea put down her brush. "Let him in." "No need, I came in myself." Zachary, acting as if he belonged there, pushed open the door and slowly walked up to the painting, studying it for a moment. "How strange." Andrea looked at him. "It is a bit strange. Can you tell what's wrong?" "The composition and everything are fine, but it seems to be missing something." Zachary looked down into her eyes and said, "It's missing a bit of soul." "Soul?" Andrea frowned at the painting. "Yes." Zachary reached out, his slender fingertips gently tracing the outline of the object in the painting. Bathed in golden sunlight, his eyes lowered, as if he were gazing into the painting. His gaze was calm and tender, as if caressing a lover's face. Andrea's heart suddenly skipped a beat, and then she heard him say, "The theme this time is childlike innocence, but in your painting, all I see is heaviness." Heaviness. But She had never experienced childlike innocence, so how could she possibly feel it? Zachary withdrew his hand and looked at her, a trace of pain flickering in his eyes. He smiled and said, "Everyone has childlike innocence. It's just that happy memories are easily forgotten, while painful ones are remembered more deeply." Zachary put away all his teasing and looked at her seriously. "Let's find your childlike innocence together, shall we?" Outside the window, the leaves rustled in the wind. Andrea looked at him, and it felt as if everything around her was receding. Back to before he went abroad. Back to before she met Alexander. Back to the university campus. Back to the first time he left. Back to the orphanage, on a day just like this. Dappled sunlight fell on his young face, and he smiled, revealing 2 sharp little canine teeth. "You don't seem happy. Want to play with me? I promise it'll make you happy." The world seemed to fall silent, leaving only the sound of the wind, outside the window and the heartbeat in the studio. Thump, thump, thump. Andrea took a deep breath, looked up with a smile, just like she did that year. "Okay. Elsewhere. Are you sure you want to withdraw your investment? This is a guaranteed profit. The returns will come soon." The man in the suit lit a cigarette irritably. Alexander's hand clenched into a fist at his side, and he said calmly, "Can you lend me $800,000? The man took a drag on his cigarette and said nothing. For this project, the man invested $600,000, and Alexander invested $800,000. At most, they were business partners. If he had $800,000 in spare cash, he would have invested it too, and wouldn't have only put in $600,000. He also knew very well that Alexander had borrowed all the money he could. This time, there was really nothing more he could do. Alexander pressed his lips together and said, "So, I'm withdrawing." These past few days, the water and electricity at home had been cut off, and Rebecca was so upset she ended up in the hospital. The debt collector's words were already a final warning. If he had any other choice, he would never have withdrawn his investment. The man stubbed out his cigarette. "And what about my sister Dorothy? Don't tell me you plan to marry her with your current assets." Alexander fell silent, but for some reason, Andrea's face flashed through his mind. The man saw the look on his face, and his expression changed instantly. "Don't tell me you're having second thoughts." Alexander neither confirmed nor denied it, simply getting up and walking out. "I won't be defeated by these minor setbacks, don't worry." The man watched his back, his gaze deep as he made a phone call. "Dora, Alexander is useless now that we've reeled him in. You'd better find another fish as soon as possible." Chapter 18. Dorothy glanced at her freshly done nails, speaking absent-mindedly. "What's going on?" The man lit another cigarette. "I guess he still can't forget about that Andrea." Dorothy replied coolly, "Don't worry. It's just that I've been ignoring him lately, so he started thinking about Andrea again. Once his $800,000 debt is settled, all I have to do is crook my finger, and he'll come crawling back like a dog." As she spoke, the dog in the yard immediately heard her voice and ran up to her. Dorothy smiled and reached out to pat its head. "Good dog, you'll always be mine." Morning light filtered through the clouds, falling onto the ground. The lake in front of the orphanage shimmered with ripples. Andrea looked at the dilapidated, lifeless orphanage before her and couldn't help but sigh. A few years ago, the orphanage ran out of funds and shut down. Completely. No one had lived there for years. She turned to Zachary. "Is this the place you said you wanted to find? Childlike innocence?" "Yeah. Isn't childlike innocence supposed to be found in the places of childhood?" Zachary took her wrist and led her inside. Andrea followed behind him, her mood heavy throughout. The furnishings and layout here hadn't changed at all. She kept her head down, and as she passed each spot, Scenes from the past seemed to flash before her eyes. The front yard. Her dad's a murderer. I heard he has mental problems too. Do you think she'll inherit it? Oh my God, that's so scary. I don't want to play with her. The garden. Director, the murderer's daughter is going to hit me. Psycho murderer. The dormitory. I heard your mom is that kind of person. Maybe you are too. So dirty, who wants to sleep next to her? Not me, she's filthy. Each sentence felt like a boulder pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. She suddenly broke free from Zachary's hand, leaned against a nearby tree, and closed her eyes in suffocating pain. I don't want to stay here. Ever since she stepped inside, all those unbearable memories kept flooding back. Those humiliations and pains that could never be erased felt carved into her bones. Every time she recalled them, it was raw and bloody. She clenched her teeth tightly, suppressing everything, refusing to open her eyes. Why did I try so hard to leave this place, yet you still brought me back? Zachary looked at her quietly, his eyes filled with tenderness. Because you've never really left here. Andrea paused. Your heart has always been trapped here. Only when your heart leaves will you truly be free from this place. Andrea, I want you to know, there aren't only painful memories here. You laughed so many times here, didn't you? You said these were the happiest days of your life, didn't you? Don't let those words take over all your memories, so. Zachary's voice was soft and gentle as he cupped her face. Don't be afraid. Open your eyes, I'm always by your side. I'm always by your side. Such familiar words. Andrea's eyelashes trembled as she slowly opened her eyes. Through her blurry vision, she saw a pair of familiar eyes. In her ears, a childish voice seemed to echo again. Don't be afraid, I'll help you drive them away. No one will bully you again. Andrea's heart trembled as she heard him say, no one will bully you again. Because you have me. Somewhere deep inside her, it felt as if with those words. It suddenly collapsed. Chapter 19. Golden sunlight filtered through the lush, verdant leaves, casting dappled patterns among his hair. A gentle mist filled his eyes, as if it enveloped Andrea completely. Never had anyone stood so firmly behind her before. No, that's not right, there was someone. A long time ago, a boy had once looked at her with the same gaze, dispelling her loneliness. But then a couple took him away. That car slowly drove out of her sight. No matter how desperately she cried and chased after it, it never turned back. She was alone again. Many years later, she met that boy again. She thought everything could return to how it was in childhood, that in the whole world there would be only him, only her. But later, he left her once again. In the bustling airport terminal, he turned and walked through the gate, not leaving a single word for her. Andrea slowly closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks as she asked hoarsely, why do you have to leave again and again, even though you promised you would always stay with me? Why, Zachary, can you tell me? Zachary lowered his gaze, a trace of deep pain slowly surfacing in his eyes. Because. He started to speak, but fell silent. After a long pause, he let out a gentle sigh and smiled faintly. Aren't we missing the point? We're here today to help you find childlike innocence, not to dwell on painful memories. The change of topic was far too abrupt. Andrea looked at his deliberately relaxed profile, clenched her hands, but didn't press further. She knew Zachary's character. If he didn't want to talk, no amount of pressure would make him. She sighed, glanced at the dilapidated surroundings, and a sense of relief appeared in her eyes. I've already found it. Zachary raised an eyebrow. So soon? Yes, Andrea lifted her gaze and looked straight into his eyes. I've already found it. Zachary's eyes froze for a moment. Andrea smiled. I've already found the most important thing from my childhood. The shadows of the trees danced as the wind passed through, leaving behind a soft, rustling sound. The world seemed to fall into a trance, like silence, with only the sound of two heartbeats, rising and falling. It felt as natural as if it had always been this way, as if it was always meant to be. After returning from the orphanage, Andrea's thoughts were completely opened up. She spent the whole day in the studio, and by the time she returned to the hotel, it was already 11 at night. As soon as she stepped into the corridor, she saw someone leaning against her door. The dim light concealed his figure, leaving only the crimson tip of his cigarette flickering in the darkness. It was as if he had been waiting for a long time. Andrea paused for a moment, then walked over as if nothing had happened. "You're blocking the way. Move." Alexander straightened up, his sharp features gradually emerging from the darkness. The light fell into his eyes, bringing with it a layer of coldness. "You spent the whole day with Zachary." Andrea replied indifferently. "Does it have anything to do with you?" Alexander stubbed out his cigarette and took a step forward, closing the distance between them to almost nothing. "Of course not. Since 3 years ago, it hasn't mattered." 3 years ago. Zachary also left 3 years ago. Andrea frowned slightly. What exactly happened 3 years ago? Why does Zachary refuse to talk about it? And why does Alexander care so much? Alexander looked at her in silence for a long time, then said in a low voice, "So, you really don't remember?" Chapter 20. Remember what? Andrea's chest suddenly tightened. She looked into Alexander's eyes, and for some inexplicable reason, fragments of white light flashed through her mind. Within the white light, it seemed as if the scent of alcohol was spreading, and a pair of hands held her tightly. Through her hazy vision, she saw a pair of eyes, deep and vast like the ocean, with a faint glimmer shining from their depths. Those were definitely not Alexander's eyes. Yet in her confusion, she lifted her head and kissed him. Andrea woke up with a start. The sunlight outside was blinding, and the birds were chirping noisily. She sat on the bed in a daze, drenched in cold sweat. Last night, Alexander hadn't said anything and was called away by a phone call from Dorothy. But that night, she had such a strange dream. She rarely drank, and the only time she had ever been drunk was 3 years ago. Who was the person she kissed then? Was it Zachary? Did his departure and Alexander's resentment have something to do with this? Andrea closed her eyes, completely at a loss. After a long silence, she slowly got out of bed, preparing to go to the studio. As soon as she reached downstairs, she saw a young girl and an old lady not far away, peering into the hotel. Rebecca hurried over. "Andrea, are you still angry with us?" Andrea felt there was nothing left to say to her, so she ignored her and walked past. But Bridget stepped in to block her way again. "Drea, I was immature before. Mom has already scolded me. Can't you forgive me?" "I'm apologizing to you, making amends. Please don't run away from home anymore." "Run away from home?" Andrea raised an eyebrow. "That isn't my home, so how could I run away from it?" Bridget paused, then said, "We've lived together for 3 years. Of course we're family." Andrea closed her eyes, patience gone, and turned to look at the two of them coldly. "Why bother pretending? My time is limited. If you have something to say it quickly so I can resolve it as soon as possible." Bridget hadn't expected her to be so blunt. She exchanged a glance with Rebecca, then looked at Andrea's expression and said, "The debt collectors have come to our door. We really have no way out. They'll beat us to death. Look." As she spoke, she lifted her sleeve, revealing bruises all over her arm. "They said we still owed $800,000 before, and we've already paid it back, but they still want more. If we don't pay, they beat us. We've borrowed money from everyone we could. We really have no other way, Drea. Please save us. Didn't you say before that you wanted to help me achieve my dream of painting? If I learn, I'll definitely come help you in your studio, even if you don't pay me." She spoke urgently, tears streaming down her face. Andrea only found it laughable. In her previous life, she had indeed protected Bridget's dream of painting, but what she got in return was not gratitude, but ridicule and resentment. A snake frozen in ice, even if saved, would never remember the kindness of the farmer, only turn back to bite her. Andrea glanced at Bridget and said, I don't have any money, but there is a way to help you pay off your debt. Whether you use it or not is up to you. What way? Bridget asked anxiously. Andrea smiled slightly. Alex actually has money, but it's all with Dorothy. They agreed he could take it if needed, but Dorothy went, back on her word, and won't return it to him. Bridget had heard of Dorothy before. She had faked her own death just to get her brother to leave with Dorothy. She had also heard about the partnership between Alexander and Dorothy's family. But she still felt a bit suspicious. Impossible. Alex has been with Dorothy these past few days. If she refused to give the money back, Alex would have already fallen out with her. Andrea said, the fact that I can mention Dorothy means I already knew about her. Why did I leave Alex? There are two reasons. One is the $800,000 debt, and the other is that Dorothy won't return the money. Your Alex is penniless now. She then smiled again. Of course, whether you believe it or not is none of my business. With that, she leisurely walked around them toward the studio, leaving Bridget and Rebecca staring blankly at her back. Something just feels off. Off about what? That little brat can't fool me. Let's go find that Dorothy right now. How dare she take our family's money? Chapter 21. Bridget frowned, but was still dragged along to Dorothy's house. The Prestons' residence. Alexander lowered his eyes and said, Sorry, but I really need that $200,000. He had already missed one business opportunity. He couldn't afford to miss this one. Dorothy pouted coquettishly. You went to see her yesterday, and today you come to borrow money from me. I don't want a disobedient dog. Ah. Before she could finish, her wrist was grabbed. Alexander's gaze grew deep. You really won't lend it to me. Dorothy's heart skipped a beat, the corners of her lips lifting slightly as she pulled open his collar. Let's see how you perform. As the intimate atmosphere spread, Alexander's breathing grew heavier. He leaned down, just about to kiss her, when a sudden scream came from outside the door. Dorothy, you little tramp, get out here. Alexander froze, his eyes instantly clearing. Dorothy frowned. Who is it who dares to insult me? As she got up and dressed, Rebecca had already barged in with Bridget. Alexander cursed inwardly, and in the next moment, Rebecca pointed at Dorothy's nose and shouted, You little bitch, hurry up and give my son his money back. Your son? Dorothy glanced at the inexplicable old woman in front of her, and at Bridget behind her, whose features bore a certain resemblance to Alexander. Her expression darkened as she turned to Alexander. These are your family. Alexander's face didn't look good either, and he remained silent. Dorothy let out a cold laugh. Ridiculous. Am I giving you money just to save these people? She looked at the bodyguard nearby. Throw them out. After saying this, as if suddenly remembering something, she turned to Alexander and smiled. Is this your sincerity? I believe I told you before I hate your family. Alexander pressed his lips together, glanced at Bridget and Rebecca, and for the first time felt truly irritated. The studio. Inside the large floor, two ceiling windows, the white curtains fluttered gently in the breeze. Andrea took 2 steps back, gazing at the rough outline on the canvas, her eyes flickering slightly. Olivia knocked on the door. Drea, there's a Mr. Wilkinson waiting for you in the reception room. He says he wants to see you. Andrea seemed to have expected this and said calmly, Tell him to go. Back, I won't see him. All right, Olivia replied, then seemed to remember something. By the way, Drea, Mr. Vasquez made an appointment. He said he wants to discuss the art exhibition with you. He should be here soon. Okay, I got it. Andrea put away her paintbrush, took off her apron, and got ready to go out. As soon as she stepped out of the studio, she saw Alexander standing at the door and couldn't help but pause. Are you blocking my way? Alexander looked extremely displeased, a cold aura radiating from him. Did you send them to find Dorothy? Andrea raised an eyebrow and said, I just said a few words. Their legs are their own. How could I control where they want to go? Alexander stared at her in silence. After a moment, he suddenly asked, How did you know about Dorothy? Andrea was unconcerned. If you don't want people to know, don't do it in the first place. She took 2 steps forward, lifting her eyes to look at Alexander calmly. You were so calm before, wasn't it because you still had Dorothy? So what do you have now? In the previous life, there was no way Alexander could have paid off a debt of $800,000 on his own, nor could he have built his business so quickly in just 3 years. All of this was because he had Dorothy behind him. But in this life, she was determined to destroy their relationship. Watching Alexander being driven into a corner made her happy. She curled her lips. Alexander, those who betray true feelings must swallow 1,000 needles. Chapter 22. Alexander's chest tightened suddenly as he looked at Andrea in front of him, pressing his lips together. You really are. I can't see through you at all. I never intended for you to see through me. Andrea smiled and turned to leave, but her wrist was suddenly yanked back by a strong force. A cold fury flickered in Alexander's eyes. My patience has run out, Andrea. Don't make me angry again. His grip was strong, sending waves of pain through her wrist bone. Andrea bit her lip and was about to break free, but a fist landed on Alexander's face even faster. Alexander grunted, stumbling back 2 steps uncontrollably. Andrea was stunned for a moment, then saw Zachary standing in front of her. He straightened his cuff, still smiling at the corners of his mouth, but his eyes were icy cold. I was wondering why you hadn't come out yet. Turns out you were tangled up with something filthy. Alexander's gaze instantly turned cold as he reached up to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. You again. Yes, it's me. Still remember me. Zachary smiled. With a memory that good, it seems Dorothy trained you well, quite human-like. Andrea couldn't help but laugh out loud. Alexander clenched his teeth, his eyes filled with icy light, looking ready to fight. Andrea spoke coldly. Alexander, if you dare lay a hand on me again, I'll call the police. You probably don't want to end up in jail at a time like this, do you? She knew Alexander still had some funds in the stock market, and he would be selling them in the next few days. This was his last card to play. Sure enough, Alexander froze, hesitated for a moment, and gave Andrea a hard look. You'll regret this. With that, he turned and walked out. Only then did Zachary turn around. Remember to carry pepper spray with you next time. Dog bites hurt quite a bit. Andrea curled her lips slightly, watching Alexander's retreating figure, her eyes darkening. Don't worry, he won't get another chance. Zachary looked at her. What do you mean? Andrea smiled and said, he put all his remaining funds into the stock market. Langford Enterprises stock has been rising quickly and seems like it will keep going up for a while, but in a couple of days, it will definitely crash below the bottom line. Zachary was puzzled. Why? Langford Enterprises stock has been steadily climbing, and there doesn't seem to be any sign of a drop. Because of a scandal, Andrea said. The chairman of Langford Enterprises will be arrested for domestic violence in a few days. How do you know that? Andrea glanced at him and beckoned him over with her finger. Zachary leaned in seriously, bringing his ear close to her lips. Andrea suppressed a laugh and whispered mysteriously, because I'm a prophet. Zachary burst out laughing and pinched her cheek. Is this fun for you? Didn't you used to play like this when you were little? Andrea mumbled indistinctly. Predicting the headmaster would hand out candy today, but you just knew someone was getting adopted ahead of time. Or pretending to be a priest to pray for rain when you actually saw ants moving their nest. You tricked me all the time when we were kids, and now I'm not allowed to trick you. Zachary looked at her smile and seemed to recall the past as well, unable to help but smile too. The next moment, as if remembering something, he took out his phone. Oh no. His expression turned serious, and Andrea, thinking something had happened, grew serious as well. What's wrong? Zachary looked up at her. I just bought Langford Enterprises stock a few days ago. I need to sell it right away. Andrea laughed and said, Why are you buying stocks? I don't remember you ever needing money. Zachary paused, his gaze drifting away. Chapter 23. Andrea paused, instantly putting away her smile. Are you really short on money? Why? She remembered the family that adopted Zachary was very wealthy, a kind of wealth she had never been close to. There was no reason for him to be short on money. Zachary sighed, saying nothing. He just smiled at her. Yes, I need money, so can a prophet foresee the winning lottery? Numbers. Seeing that he didn't want to talk about it, Andrea also put away her curiosity. There was no need to dig too deep into things. Lottery numbers are all man-made, don't you know that? After she finished speaking, Andrea's eyes suddenly lit up. But we can bet on the games. The outcome of the matches wouldn't change just because she was reborn. Although she didn't watch sports, she remembered not only the winners and losers of those few shocking matches, but also the scores. That was enough to make a fortune. Besides, this year was 2018. The World Cup was happening this year. Andrea excitedly patted Zachary on the shoulder. Zachary, we're about to achieve financial freedom. Zachary rubbed his shoulder where she had hit him, looking at her excited face, and lowered his eyes with a smile. We. Andrea said excitedly, yes, us. As soon as she spoke, she suddenly stopped. Us? When did she start tying herself together with Zachary? She looked up in surprise, gazing into Zachary's eyes. For some reason, an image flashed through her mind. He was holding her in his arms, his cold hands trembling as he gripped hers. Again and again, a trembling, fearful voice called out in her ear. Don't die, don't die. It seemed as if his world had suddenly collapsed along with her death. Those eyes that always held a smile were now filled with tears. Andrea's chest suddenly felt blocked, and she reached out to clutch her heart. There the pain was almost shattering, a sour ache filling her entire chest. Zachary never liked to see her upset, so he quickly smiled and changed the subject. Almost forgot, Damon will be coming here in a few days. He's very interested in your paintings, but there's another artist who also wants to submit work, so you need to finish your painting quickly. When Andrea heard this, all her emotions instantly disappeared. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I have to work overtime these days. She hurried back to the studio to rush her work. Zachary watched her back and couldn't help but smile. A few days later, the wife of the chairman of Langford Enterprises reported him under her real name. The chairman was arrested, and overnight, all the stocks plummeted. Countless shareholders wailed in despair. How could this happen? Alexander stared at the sea of green on his phone screen, nearly grinding his teeth to pieces. This was his last bit of capital. Now he truly had no backup plan. Even though he was always calm and composed, faced with this situation, he couldn't help but break down. After a long time, he took a deep breath and called Dorothy. The phone rang a few times before being hung up. He gripped his phone tightly and called her brother instead. Stop calling me, I can't help you either. Alexander said in a low voice, I want to see Dorothy, give her the phone. The man looked awkwardly at Dorothy, who was calmly playing with a dog nearby. My sister has made it very clear. Deal with your family first, then come to her. Alexander fell silent, and after a moment, Dorothy took the phone. Alexander, I've run out of patience. Next, I'll solve the problem my own way. The next day, after meeting with Damon and discussing the details of their collaboration, Andrea returned to her studio in a good mood. As soon as she entered, she saw Olivia walking over with a troubled expression. Andrea frowned slightly. What's wrong? Olivia glanced at her awkwardly and held her phone screen up to Andrea's face. Drea, look. Andrea glanced at the screen, and in an instant, all the blood in her body seemed to freeze. A glaring headline was trending at the top of the search list. Damon's collaboration with a streetwalker. Chapter 24. In the entry, there was a photo of her and Damon discussing cooperation. Below it lay all her background, disgraceful and unbearable to look at. The comment section was equally condescending. I never thought much of this art exhibition, traveling thousands of miles to our country just for a painting. Impossible. It must be for someone. How old is Damon now? And this woman still goes after him. So disgusting. Is this the world of you artists? Andrea read through each comment, her hand trembling as she held her phone. It was happening again, just like before. Her background was exposed, followed by endless humiliation. She could no longer go outside. Every time she did, she would be the subject of all kinds of gossip. Every vile word would be attached to her. A chill crept inch by inch into her heart, draining all color from her face. Olivia saw her pallor and quickly put away her phone. Drea, I absolutely believe in you. You're not that kind of person. She hurried to say something comforting, but Andrea just let out a soft laugh. Her gaze vacant, she walked toward the studio. Does it even matter what kind of person I am anymore? No one would listen to her explanation, and no one cared about the truth. Olivia watched her retreating figure, anxiously calling Zachary, but no one ever answered. Pick up, please, Zachary. Only you can save Drea now. On the other side, at the Prestons' residence. Are you sure it's okay not to answer the phone? Dorothy gently stroked the Samoyed's head. Zachary glanced at the vibrating phone on the table and casually turned it off. His gaze was indifferent, and his voice was just as cold. Dorothy, I told you not to touch her. Dorothy looked up at him. Cousin, you must be mistaken. It was the netizens who went after her, not me. Zachary said coldly, I remember you have a plot of land in the north of the city. You must have invested all your money there, right? Dorothy's expression changed. Zachary continued, if your own dog keeps running outside, just keep it at home. Don't make things difficult for innocent passers-by. If I still see any discussion about this online within 3 hours, you won't want to know the consequences. With that, he stood up decisively and walked out. Dorothy gritted her teeth as she watched his back. The butler said, Mr. Wilkinson is here. Alexander, Dorothy snorted coldly. I won't see him. I can't control the passers-by, but can I control a dog? A disobedient dog. I don't want it anymore. Let it fend for itself. The studio. Andrea sat in the corner, all the curtains drawn. There was no light, no lamp. She hugged herself tightly, curling into a ball. Endless panic nearly pushed her sanity into the darkness. When she closed her eyes, all she could see was her father coming home covered in blood. Police cars stopped downstairs, sirens blaring. And under the red and blue lights, all the neighbors looked at her with strange eyes. She wanted to escape those stares, those discussions. She tried desperately to hide behind her mother, but her mother pulled her out and made her drink with some drunken guests. She sat in the living room, listening to the sounds of heavy breathing coming from the room. It was her mother, with an unknown man. She kept her eyes tightly shut, but tears streamed down her face. Endless darkness swallowed her whole. Suddenly, there was a soft sound of the door opening. A beam of light slipped through the crack, falling onto her face. Someone walked toward her, each step heavy. Those cold hands gently cupped her face, as if handling the world's most precious jewel, wiping away her tears. Andrea, don't be afraid. He always said that. Andrea's heart sank, and bitter tears fell heavily. She kept her eyes tightly shut, tears streaming down her cheeks. Zachary, am I disgusting? Pain flickered in Zachary's eyes. Andrea, that's not true. It's all just an illusion. Open your eyes. I'm the only one in front of you. Andrea slowly opened her eyes, her vision blurred. She saw her own reflection in Zachary's eyes. And only her reflection. Chapter 25. Those eyes seemed familiar, as if she had seen them somewhere before. On a rainy night, on a drunken evening, her mind had been just as clouded. Back then, she gazed into those eyes, kissed his lips, pressed him onto the bed, and unbuttoned his shirt. She gently bit the side of his neck and heard a gasp of unbearable desire. That gasp was so familiar, so very familiar, it sounded just like Zachary. But that couldn't be right. The only person she could do such things with was Alexander, so she called his name. Alexander. The person beneath her instantly stiffened. With a loud bang, the door was flung open. Alexander stood outside, coldly watching everything inside. Andrea suddenly pushed Zachary away, her shock beyond belief. That night it was you. She had mistaken the person, so Zachary left, and that was why Alexander thought she had cheated on him. Zachary looked at his now empty hands, his gaze pausing. You remember everything now. Andrea covered her lips, looking at Zachary through tears. Why? Why would she forget even something so important? I'm sorry. Sorry. Zachary looked at her quietly, a bitter smile suddenly appearing. Is that all you have to say? Just sorry? A stabbing pain twisted in Andrea's chest. She squeezed her eyes shut, not daring to meet Zachary's gaze. Zachary let out a long sigh. It's pointless to dwell on all this. Your problem has been resolved. I've already arranged for someone to clear things up. He glanced at Andrea, who was trembling uncontrollably, and his eyes dimmed. I said I would always stand behind you, but if you don't want to see me, I won't appear before you. His voice was so soft, it was almost ethereal. Andrea's chest twisted with intense pain. She suddenly opened her eyes, only to find that the doorway was already empty. Only the white window curtains fluttered in the air. This time, the incident did not spread as it had in her previous life. It was suppressed almost instantly, and soon those marketing accounts apologized. Even if several people came forward to confirm it was true, it would be immediately silenced. A few days later, Dorothy, the heiress of the Preston Group, officially announced her relationship with her young boyfriend, who was working as a male model, and that completely overshadowed all public opinion. This young boyfriend was not Alexander. Everyone knew he had been utterly abandoned, and no one ever saw him again. Andrea and Damon's art exhibition went very smoothly. After drinking the celebratory wine, on her way home, she saw several familiar people chasing after debts. The person running ahead of them was Alexander. She hesitated for a moment, then followed. She saw Alexander escape into a narrow alley, evading the debt collectors, and then head further down. In the dim surroundings, Alexander's clothes were tattered, his face bore some injuries. Rebecca was coughing, Bridget was crying. Despair filled the entire home. Andrea watched for a moment, sighed, and placed a few $100s in cash at the doorway. As she left, she accidentally bumped into an empty soda can on the ground. Alexander cautiously walked to the door, only to see several $100 bills lying on the ground. His hands at his sides suddenly clenched into fists. Staring into the dark night, his eyes were full of unwillingness. The end. And that's a wrap on today's reading here at Booked for Drama. If you felt anything, rage, swoon, secondhand heartbreak, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your fellow drama lovers. If you have any requests, drop them in the comments. Until next time, keep reading and keep the drama on the page.